I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I am particularly excited that you are joining me on this Moving Mountain Monday with Dr. Teresa Hord Owens. But in our first hour is none other than Ernest Krim III, an Emmy-nominated producer, public teacher, anti-racist educator, and hate crime victor who uses Black historical narratives to empower and educate through a culturally equitable lens. Mr. Krim, a South Side of Chicago native and University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana graduate, is a former high school history education teacher of 12 years who now also advocates for social justice issues and teaches Black history to the world through social media with a platform that reaches roughly 4 million people each month as of 2024. Ernest Krim is my very special guest in the first hour. We will be joined in the second hour by none other than Dr. Teresa Hord Owens. But before I get to that, thinking about Ernest Krim and our program today, I wanted to turn my attention to something Martin Luther King Jr. said about the present. So I'm going to opine for a minute. He says in this particular speech, and you know, if I were standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general panoramic view of the whole of human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in? Dr. King said I would take my mental flight by Egypt and I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the promised land. And in spite of this magnificence, he said I would not stop there. I would move to Greece and take my mind to Mount Olympus, and I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, Aristophanes assembled around the Parthenon, and I would watch them around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality. But I wouldn't stop there. I would go on even to the great heyday of the Roman Empire, and I would see developments around there through various emperors and leaders, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the day of the Renaissance and get a quick picture of all of the Renaissance did for the cultural and aesthetic life of man, but I would not stop there. I would even go by the way by which the man for whom I'm named had his habitat. And I would watch Martin Luther as he tacked his 95 Theses on the church at Wittenberg, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to 1863 and watch a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but I wouldn't stop there. He said he would even come up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. But he wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and I would say, if you would just allow me to live a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I would be happy. Now that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that the only way we see clearly is when at dark you can see the stars. And I see God working in this period out of the 21st century in a way that men and in some strange way are responding. Our guest, Ernest Krim, is a young man who is engaged as a millennial with our young people. At 60 years old, I recognize the finiteness of my own existence, as I think we all should and must. And at some point in time, we must recognize that the true strength of who we are isn't just the sum of who we were. It's the sum of who we are in the present, and it's the sum of what we can be. And what we can be is through our youth, through younger people who are committed and dedicated to the present, who have some sense of the past, who have some sense of where we've come from. I must be candid. This is the first year that I've seen people actually connecting Juneteenth and the commemoration of Juneteenth to the hypocrisy of July 4th. Just 15 days from our Juneteenth celebrations, which in truth should be commemorations, because 2 more years in slavery after the Emancipation Proclamation isn't something we ought to be celebrating. It's something we ought to be commemorating and mad as hell about. But with that said, July 4th is a peculiar day in American history in that Africans were on these shores 156 years before Jefferson wrote the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence. For 56 years on these shores, July 4th was just another day. It was just another day for them. And yet, we're towards something. And we're towards something because young people are demanding that we be something more than we plan to be, than we think we are. There's an oughtness to who they are. And when we come forward, I'm going to talk with Ernest Krim III about what millennials think about what's going on and what we must do to reclaim our heritage, reclaim democracy for all, and continue the fight for justice. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Joining us now is Ernest Krim III. Ernest, how are you, brother?
Hey, I'm doing great, brother Jesse. It's always good to be in community with you. So thank you for having me back.
I appreciate you so much. I tried to pay you the highest possible compliment that I could. That Dr. King said that if we could take a flight back to the earliest of periods of human history and measure it against who we are called to be in the present, that all he could do was thank Almighty God for this moment. He wasn't born in the Renaissance. He wasn't born in in ancient times. He was born for this moment.
Hmm.
Ernest, share with us your sense of how millennials, your generation, and what your leadership means in the context of what we are experiencing as a nation at this hour.
Well, thank you for that very reflective piece too to start off this segment. You know, I was speaking to a family yesterday. They have a gathering every month where they get on a Zoom call, and they invited me to speak about Juneteenth as we kind of end this season. And there were some millennials on the call too. And I think the general feeling that I gather from my experience where I am and where we are is there's it feels like a ball of confusion at this point in time in history. When we think about millennials and what we've been through in our life, and of course, this is not to compare to any other generation of what they've overcome, because I have parents who lived through Jim Crow. I have a grandmother who's turning 90 this week. So Lord knows we've seen many issues beyond this present moment. But we've seen 9/11, we've seen Katrina, we've seen the war in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. We were growing up under the belief that we wouldn't see a black president. In fact, if you recall, comedians often joked that the first black president was a man named Bill Clinton. That's how far we felt we were off from actually seeing that. One of my favorite artists, Tupac, famously said, "Even though it seems heaven sent, we ain't ready to have a black president." I experienced that, brother, when I was in college, when I was awakening to this, when everything came together, when I was at this space where I was essentially able to learn around the clock and not have all the outside distractions of my neighborhood. And to see that, in many ways, you felt like America was, as Dr. King said, we were at the mountaintop. We knew we had a lot of issues still, because we saw how Obama was being treated and the commentary that came with that. But it felt like we were moving in the right direction. But then to go through that, and then to have a president emerge who essentially emerges as an open white supremacist, who has found a way to galvanize a group of people who felt overlooked, who has found a way to use language that is very direct yet indirect, right? Because we come from a schooling where we feel as though a person can truly only be racist in our eyes if they use certain language or certain words. It was mind-boggling to experience that from 2016 through 2020. But then again, we had another glimmer of hope when 2020 happened, and of course, it came after a tragedy. Just like you said, with Juneteenth being more of a commemoration, it's the same thing. When we had Breonna Taylor, we had Ahmaud Arbery, brother George Floyd. Like, these situations back to back to back led to something that in some ways reminded us again, okay, we can't go back. We cannot have this person in office again. We cannot go back to the same mentality, only to be right where we are 4 or 5 years later. So I say we're confused because not that we don't know our history, know our past. I feel like we are more knowledgeable than most generations. And that's not to say that we are more intelligent, but we have more access to information now. I think we're trying to figure out what this truly means for us within this social structure that is America. I see a lot of us taking time. I recall our previous conversation, like how we're grappling with this. I think a lot of us are taking the time, and this is probably not just in our generation, but we want to find space to heal. We
Mm.
want to find space to continue our joy. I was looking up the etymology of what free and freedom meant yesterday when I was speaking to this family, and I was taken back by the fact that one of the root definitions of free meant joy. And I thought that was very telling when you speak about our experience, because when have we not ever experienced and put forth that expression of joy in our community? Even through our darkest days, we couldn't be here today in this moment without the joy. When you speak about Dr. King, I reflect on the images I saw, the minority of images of him smiling, of him on vacation with his family, of him throwing up the peace sign. That's not the person we saw in public oftentimes, because these were serious issues. But he had to smile. When Malcolm X, like, they had to smile to get through this moment. So we're grappling with, how do we heal yet fight?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because I don't believe that through all the teaching and schooling that we have received, and that's primarily, we have to juxtapose that schooling from the school system versus what our elders have taught us. The
Yeah.
school system will teach us that it has to be, it's something that you can't reconcile. You either this or that. We've always been taught that these issues are black and white. We weren't taught the duality and the complexities of a Thomas Jefferson, who wrote those eloquent words, yet enslaved
Yeah.
black men and black women, hundreds of folks on Monticello. So we are really dissecting and reflecting on that, because I think for us, we have seen the impact of this beast on our parents, the
Yeah.
trauma that they've dealt with. I think about my mom and my dad, who grew up in the 60s in Chicago, and in the stories they tell me in Chicago about having to go to school in the Willis wagons because the school system refused to integrate, or
Yeah.
having when they took road trips down south to have to pack chicken in shoe boxes because their parents were too afraid to stop. We look at that as the beneficiaries of what they went through, what they persisted through, and we say, how do we make sure that we don't deal with that same thing? And how do we make sure our kids don't? How do we enjoy this moment? We got brunch every day, right? We got restaurants popping up all the time. We got social media trends everywhere that we can express this joy. Yet in the shadows looms this beast that we face, that we know we have to fight, brother. So we are confused yet determined to fight and to heal.
I want to but first of all, let me congratulate you for that, brother. That was quite a oration on how the generation is feeling. I want to just remind the listeners, when we take together, Brother Krim and I, this panoramic view of human history with Martin Luther King Jr. Ernest, how old are you?
37.
Ernest is 37 years old. Malcolm X, I believe, was in the Audubon Ballroom at age 35. I'm sorry, 39.
39.
My producer is reaching across, hollering 39. I appreciate that, Gina. Martin Luther King Jr. is on the balcony at the Lorraine Motel at age 39. Both the same age. And yet, even to this day, we are still searching for the meaning of the content of their thoughts in their sacrifice, what they were willing to sacrifice, including their lives, to warn us, but also to save the nation, the extent to which there was a unique patriotism in Dr. King's message, that we could save the nation. And by age 39, both of them were gone. And yet the things that they said and did are still with us and very much eternal. I wonder, in the confusion of this generation, if the time is spent in worry, the time is spent in anxiety, or is the time spent in preparation for a kind of leadership that accepts its finitude, that life does come to an end, that I may not get there with you, but we as a people will make it to the promised land? Is there a preparation taking place in this generation with the understanding that we as a people are going somewhere? And in going that where, there could be a final destination that could be tragically cut short.
Yes, I think so. I think, to your point, we have been fed in repetition the images of Dr. King and Malcolm X being assassinated at 39 years old. We've seen Fred Hampton at 21 years old. We've seen so many of our great leaders be shot at or be killed during that time period. And already, as a black man growing up in an urban environment, you already don't know how far, how long you'll make it. Like being from Chicago, I think it was Kanye who said, they thought we never make it past 25. Jokes on you, we still alive. And the the depth of that quote speaks to the fact that oftentimes we don't think about what life is like past that moment. What does activism look like past 39? Although they were only, and now as I'm approaching that age, I realize how young that is. The black and white images feed us a different narrative. The suits they wore feed a different narrative juxtaposed to somebody like me who might be wearing J's and hoodies most of the time. But I think that we have to, one of my missions now is to begin to pull away. Although I spread my messages online, I think that we are often reactionary because it feels good. It feels good to gather in community on social media spaces and respond to the next tragedy, the next law, the next policy, the next pulling back of civil rights issues and liberties. It feels good for us to respond that way because we never had that opportunity before. You might not have the opportunity at work 6 years ago. You might have to go out of your way to be in community. But I think that we've built a false sense of community doing this, because of that have become mostly reactionary as opposed to pulling back and looking at the systems and resources we already have in place. And it's addictive. They understand what they're doing. The currency is our time and it's our attention. I would challenge people as a history teacher who's a public history teacher now, I would say, I think we need to begin to look at the multitude of our ancestors and activists who did live beyond that moment. Even with my oldest children who are 12 and 10, I have to often tell them when we talk about somebody, I have to say, you know what, they did live a long life. And why is that the understanding already subconsciously? Because I know how they feel. When I talk about Harriet Tubman, she lived a long life, right? Frederick Douglass lived a long life. When I talk about Rosa Parks, she lived a long life. It boggles my kid's mind to think about the fact that I was alive when she was alive. Or
Mm.
the fact that at one point in her life, when she moved to the Midwest in Detroit, she took up, I think it was Buddhism and yoga as a way to decompress. If we look at what our ancestors' lives looked like after they were in the spotlight, because we have to remember the fight continued. She didn't stop. If we can look at that, let's say post 39 years old, I think we can get a better idea of how we do this in the long run, because that's what needs to be done. I think I figured out sometime in college as I read through all of these books and I realized that these issues were still present, that, we just had to pick up that we had to pick up that burden that they had to stop fighting for at that particular time and continue to do it. This is a never ending fight. We don't know when the mountaintop will come. We don't know when we'll exactly get what we want, but I'm of the firm belief that it will happen. I don't for a second believe that this won't come to fruition the way we want it to.
Brother Krim, we have about 2 minutes, maybe a little bit less before the break. My before we come forward, that's what we say here on KBLA. I bumped into at least 3 millennials this week, and almost all of them, to the letter, without prompting, say that maybe what's going on in the country is good for us. Maybe we now need to turn to each other. Now maybe we need to consider banking with each other. We need to be doing more together as a community, as if there is some kind of acknowledgement that they do know something existentially and outside of our community is taking place, but somehow they don't see just how much what is taking place on the outside is actually a glue to the fabric of what takes place on the inside of our community. Now, I only have about a minute and 30 seconds. Give me your take. Is that a general millennial sentiment that
Yeah,
somehow everything Trump is taking from us and the government is taking from blacks and whites and browns and working class people around this country, somehow we're supposed to end up at the end of the day in community?
yeah, I don't think that it should take that for us to want to rely on community. I think what I do see though is the fact that we have not realized how much we benefited from what they fought for back then, because we were born in the midst of it. I was born in the mid to late 80s. So I'm a beneficiary of everything they sacrificed and fought for. I don't think it's a good thing that this is happening, but I think that we as people can pull meaning from everything, and I don't in anything. And I don't think that we should conflate those two things. Whatever comes our way, we'll find a way to make a way out of no way. But this is not what it should take. We should always be in community and always find a way to be with each other to build.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in this hour is none other than Ernest Krim III, an Emmy-nominated producer and a serious young millennial for whom which we should all keep our eyes on. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, you'll be listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in this hour is Ernest Krim III. Ernest has created content for companies such as HBO, Hulu, Disney, Paramount, and the History Channel. Additionally, he's the CEO of Krim's Cultural Consulting LLC, an international speaker who has spoken at Harvard University, the University of Chicago, Microsoft, Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights Camp, and audiences in the UK and Canada, and the author of 2 books and a passionate progressive education activist who's worked closely with organizations to advocate for educational and political equity. Ernest, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's good to be here still.
It's always a pleasure. Ernest, let me throw a couple of things out at you.
Mhm.
So they say that what has formed community for African Americans historically was our condition. So we all found ourselves in the condition of slavery. We have perpetually found ourselves in community because in some way or form, we've all been victims of some form of discrimination, whether it's gender-based, whether it's race-based, whether it's sexual orientation-based. Sometimes these external forces force us into community. Culture has been a factor in what establishes community. I heard Reverend Jamal Bryant preach the other day that 5 nightclubs are closing every day in the United States from the generation that I grew up in. So meeting at the club is a changing reality. The club culture scene, right? Then the church scene is getting smaller.
Mhm.
Fewer and fewer people in the pulpit, but historically we've relied upon the church to build community, right? Now, I mean, maybe it was just me, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but this was the first 4th of July that I ever felt like it was country and Western everywhere. It was
Mm.
kind of honky tonk. It was kind of, it was everybody but us on this July 4th on national television celebrating fireworks. It was almost as if the Trump pushback on culture and that which we have historically used to create community itself is under attack. And tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if my feelings or sentiments about that are wrong, because my question to you is, how do we establish community when community itself seems to be under attack?
That's a great question, great insight. To your point, you're correct because so much of what we do now in our generation, if we explicitly name something as it is, like if there's an organization that's advocating for the issues that Black women face or Black men face or Black children face, it gets demonized. A lot of us in our generation have found that it's important to explicitly name these things. There are things that we deal with as people of color, people who are minoritized, but there are things that we deal with specifically in our community. And because we have named that as it has been under attack. I know so many organizations that I have collaborated with. I know organizations in Chicago and beyond, from the East Coast to the West Coast, who are losing funding because of this very real issue. We are also, though, grappling with what it meant to grow up and to, I wouldn't even say explicitly celebrate the 4th, but to have family gatherings on the 4th. And to now, within the last 4 years, some of us, even in our own community, have just become aware of Juneteenth. So now there's this. I remember growing up, you would every 4th of July, especially on social media, you would see people in our community donned in like the flag attire. They would have the striped pants and the stars on their shirt. I haven't really seen that, to your point. I haven't seen that as much. I think we're trying to, again, figure out what that means. I think that we are aware that when folks talk about America, the American dream, they don't explicitly mean us, although we've been here longer than a lot of people, although we laid the foundation economically through force, although we have contributed so much after only being 13% of the population most times. It's, again, the ball of confusion I spoke about on the onset of our conversation. How does Juneteenth fit into what we've done? Is how do we make meaning of this moving forward? And how are we even viewed politically? Because we see the attacks, we see what's going on with ICE, We see what's going on with our organizations, but there's also an understanding that you cannot do those same things to us because of our history here. And I think it's also important to name that I recall when I was younger that this common theme was that as you get older, you get kids, get a family, you're going to grow more conservative. And we are a generation that's actually proven that wrong. Millennials are not growing more conservative. We are not going to that other side. We are one of the first generations that will have less wealth than our parents, less home ownership. So all of these things that we were fed, especially with the idea of just going to college, getting your degree and getting this job for 30, 40 years have proven to be false, because we are in limbo with every executive order. We thought, and me particularly too, I thought if I taught for at least 10 years, I would have my loans forgiven at least. And that's something that I'm still dealing with every time. So this American dream and the social structure for us, Jesse, is for us, and how I view it and how my friends and my circle, we're just like, we don't know what's going to become of it, but whatever it is, we ain't going to shed too many tears. We just have to make sure that we have to be in community regardless of what happens.
I appreciate you sharing that point of view. And if I had a lesson for millennials, they should care. And I'm not saying that you don't. I'm saying that they should give a damn about what happens to America, because our ancestors are responsible for the America that we know. I don't need to go through all of the amendments with you or even with our listening audience. I do it just about at least once a week on this show. But this is our country. We've lived as African Americans under no different experiment. We are not Nigerian. We're not Congolese. We are not Kenyan. We're not Jamaican. We may like the food. We may enjoy the music. We may enjoy some of the cultural aspects of our diasporic existence. But we're Americans. That's who we are. And we take trips abroad. We come back. We have a little bit more ethnocentric cultural experiences. We come back. We bring it. But we're still Americans. And in a real sense, the definition of what America becomes is largely our responsibility. Because anyone who got off the Mayflower or got off of a cruise ship last week on Ellis Island and found themselves here in the United States today, they did not necessarily fight for the rights that we have that even help their definition of what constitutes being an American. And I would argue, Ernest, to any millennial that I were before, that we have an obligation to finish defining what America is based on our experience. And if this experiment is over, I'm not prepared to say so be it. I just don't know what comes after. Has your generation given any thought, Ernest, to what may come after this experiment, even if we find ourselves in community?
I think that we've really grappled with this idea, to your point, of Project 2025, right? This is something that was in the works for years, for decades. I think that we're grappling with, well, what's our plan? We again too complacent, in my opinion, and too comfortable with the sacrifices of the past, not realizing that we have to renew that social contract moving forward as well.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to Ernest Krim on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, we'll talk about the social compact. We'll talk about what it's going to take to build a more perfect union for all of us going forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr.
Face another day, 'cause you hear me when I pray. Don't have to hold back. You take me right where I'm at. There's no need to fear. You wiped away all my tears. No other love compares. 'Cause you're always there. Because of you, I can take a stand. Because of you, take me right where I'm at. There's no need to fear. You wiped away all my tears. No other love compares. 'Cause you're always there. Because of you, I take a stand. Nothing's gonna hold me down. You. Oh yeah, yeah. I am strong. Nothing's gonna hold me down. 'Cause of you. Only 'cause of you. In any language I can say is you. It's only 'cause of you. I'm prepared to make a stand. Nothing's gonna hold me down. Only 'cause of what you do.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in this hour has been Ernest Krim III, an Emmy-nominated producer, public school teacher, anti-racist educator, and hate crime victor who uses Black historical narratives to empower and educate through a culturally equitable lens. Ernest, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Hey, what's up? What's up?
Man, listen, I'm going to stop asking you the softball questions because as I began this program, I said that the present is all about you. Again, I'm 60 years old, maybe, God willing, 10 more good years left. But this is all yours, man. This is your generation's, and the clarity that you have in your mind matters to me. So I'm no more softball questions. Now, I have faith in God. I have faith in my family. I have faith in some close and dear friends. I don't have faith in everybody. A lot of people will let you down in this life, but I do have faith. It seems to me that one of the magic tricks that the founding fathers were able to pull off is that we have faith in this nation in certain ideals. The Declaration of Independence, the hypocrisy notwithstanding, July 4th, 1776 is what it is. But the ideal that all men are created equal. Yes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all women are created equal too. Through time is an ideal that we long for, even if it's not the letter of the law. Yes, faith in the Constitution, not because of the 3/5 clause or how the states were admitted to the Union or how property and representation was apportioned amongst the states because of the 3/5 property clause in the Constitution, but the ideals: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, due process, basic fundamental rights that would include but not limited to the right not to be in slavery, the right to equal protection under the laws, the right to vote, the 15th, the 19th Amendment, 26-year-olds, your generation and younger, having the right to vote. Faith and ideals. Faith in a piece of paper. Now here's the tough hardball question. How do we get your generation that lived through George Floyd and lived through all of this stuff that we've seen the last 4, 8, maybe even 12 years, have faith in a constitution that has endured in spite of? Without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, how do we reestablish faith in our direction for America?
That's tough. How do we restore faith? As briefly as I can. Firstly, it has to be something that applies to all people. And it can't be contingent upon your skin color or your economic class. I think what we've seen, if I was still in the classroom now, it would be so easy to teach a government class like I used to, because in just these few months, Trump is giving us like a display of what you can do, what you can't do, but you can't get away with, and all these various other things. And also too, just the strategies his team put in place to put the Supreme Court justices in. And I think that is the top issue that we have to deal with. And of course, that wasn't something that was explicitly stated in the papers, these beautiful, eloquently written documents, but it's something that we have to take into account. I'm always of the mindset that these brilliantly flawed men who wrote this document didn't have us in mind when they wrote this in the 1770s, 1780s. And I'm also of the understanding that they did not consider women at the table. They did not consider the indigenous people at the table. So I think we have to grapple with the fact that so many perspectives weren't included, despite the fact that it's something that, if applied in an equitable manner, is very sufficient. You know, I think for us to feel as though we have some type of faith to have faith in something, to believe in something, there has to be some form of reciprocity. So I have to believe that if I have faith, it's because I'm getting something in return. And as people, we have, like, I don't want to say never, because there have been, like, when we lead the way, we get something, not fully what we want, but we get something. But on that end of the spectrum, with the people who have put these laws in place and have used violence to exert it over time, there has to be some form of reparative justice. And when I'm talking about reparations, I'm not just talking about some form of compensation, although I believe that has to be considered. I'm talking about what the United Nations considers as like these pillars. They did not apologize for enslaving us until it was very obvious that Obama was going to become the president. I think that is something we have to really look at. This country, this government didn't admit that was wrong until it became clear that, yeah, this is going to look bad if we have a black president, and we don't admit on the record that what we did was atrocious. We have to, like, in order for any form of reparations to be possible, as an educator, I understand foundationally we have to start with redoing our whole education system, because it shouldn't even be a fight to say that a group of people like us, a group of people like the indigenous people, deserve some form of justice. If we are educating kids properly from age 6 to 18, by the time they can vote, that is something they will willingly vote for. So that has to change. And I think until something like that changes, until we get these formal acknowledgments of the pain on state levels, city levels, county levels, there can be no faith, because what we have seen, even if we haven't even studied history, the trauma we've been exposed to on the outside and in our communities is enough to say, like, do they really care about us? And oftentimes it feels like they don't. And that is not simply a race based question. Does anyone in power care about our kids? Do they care about us? And most folks in my generation, I don't think it's just us. I think Gen Z, I think folks even older than us would say that it does not feel that way. And there's proof of that. So can we make those words actually stick and be a thing? I think it can, but we can't act like the past ain't the past, and we can't act like the present ain't the present.
Our leader in the next hour will be none other than Teresa Howard Owens, President and General Minister of the Disciples of Christ in Canada and the U.S. Church. Reverend Teresa Howard Owens joins Jesse Jackson Jr. to dive into the role of the faith community and stepping up to the challenges of being who and what they say they are. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. My very special guest, Ernest Krim, is going to join us in the first segment of the next hour when we come forward on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Now, I do know that I have just a few more seconds. I do want to add that that Ernest, I'm very grateful to know that this generation is in great hands. When we come forward, we're going to have that conversation with President Teresa Howard Owens.
You'll be my lover, my
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, where on Mondays we have Moving Mountain Mondays, The Faith Not to Fall with Reverend Terry Hord Owens on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Terry Hord Owens is the president and general minister of the Disciples of Christ in Canada and the U.S. Reverend Terry Hord Owens and myself, we serve in a role that helps strengthen the faith community. And so I want to share with President Owens, that we've had a millennial on our program for the last hour, Reverend Owens, and I want to invite Ernest Krim to rejoin us because I think he raised some pretty important points for the faith community in terms of their outreach. Reverend Terry Hord Owens, I want you to meet Ernest Krim. Ernest Krim, President Terry Hord Owens.
Hey,
I am a fan.
man?
I am a fan, Ernest. I follow you. I live here in the Chicago area. And my dad is a retired Black history professor, Black studies professor at Knox College in Galesburg. And so when I saw that you were on the first hour, I've been listening to every word. I'm feeling old because you're just a couple years older than my own son. So I'm only a couple of years older than Jesse. So I'm
Thank you for
feeling
your
like
support.
the elder in the circle, but you are doing tremendous, tremendous work. I grew up having to read a book a week by or about Black people, or I didn't get half of my allowance. And my dad is still reading and writing at almost 84 and still committed to our people. So I have him to thank for so much, but just such a fan and follow you and watch what you do. So.
Madam President, I have a question, and I'd like it to be a bridge conversation, if you don't, in this part of our show with Ernest. And that is the church has an obligation to the nurturing of the millennials and to generations that are even younger than Brother Krim's generation. His head is screwed on straight. There's no doubt about that. But I can't say that all of us are, or that our heads are screwed on straight. What should we be imparting to Ernest with the remainder of our time so that he can pick up this mantle and carry it forward?
Well, I think the church and all of its manifestations, and Ernest, the denomination I lead is a mainline denomination, code for predominantly white, by 80% white, 10, 11% Black. But I grew up in the Black Baptist church. My husband serves as the minister of music at Salem Baptist Church in Chicago. So I have some ties there. And that church has been very committed to grassroots, local neighborhood empowerment and really paying attention to the people. I think the most important thing we can do to millennials and younger is to listen to them. Our churches have been guilty of, we want to fill our pews with young people. We want them to come in, but we don't want them to listen to us. We want them to listen to us. We don't want to listen to them. We don't want them to lead. We think that they'll sit and wait around for leadership opportunities when most of us are old and decrepit. We're not paying attention to the truth and the reality of what their world is. We are not really even paying attention to the radical inclusivity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Too many church communities of color are apolitical. We think it's more about getting our shout on Sundays with a well-produced worship service. And I say that as the wife of a minister of music. All that stuff's well and good. But there's a great book my husband told me about called The Dangerous Act of Worship, that worship is really just getting you ready to do the work of justice. But we have to listen and pay attention. We're too closed in terms of who we will receive based on what kind of clothes they're wearing, what their sexual orientation is. We're still too hung up on this stuff that has nothing to do with the gospel. It's everything to do with our backward notions of what church should be about. And young people do not listen to anything or want to be a part of anything that's not relevant to their lives. I joke with our folks, oh, they're so intent about having coffee hour after church on Sunday. And I say, you know, there are a lot of good places for me to get a good cup of coffee on Sunday. I don't need to walk through your doors to get that. And if that's all you care about is who's in your little group, who's in this building, and you're not addressing the real issues of the people in your community, and you're not listening to young people. I try to make sure that in all of our committees, we've just done a huge reshaping of our governance to ensure that we have younger people even serving on our general board. I always want this point in my career and my time, Jesse, to be the oldest person in the room. If I'm not the oldest person in the room, there's a problem. I ideally want to have people under 40. All but about 3 people who planned our General Assembly, which will happen this coming week in Memphis, Tennessee, were under 40. We have to listen. We have to provide opportunities to learn. And we will figure out, if we listen to them, the direction in which we should go. Young people are seeking spiritual relevance, but they don't necessarily need church to be the way it was when we grow up, in large part because we are not really bearing witness to that limitless and radical inclusive love that Jesus talked about. We're more concerned about which deacon is in charge and what our buildings look like. We're not concerned about the people in our communities. There are exceptions to that, but that's what young people see by and large. And that's what I'm hearing from the young people, millennials in our denomination, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. I'm hearing it all.
Ernest, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, if you don't mind, on the other side of the break, because I do want you to engage with President Teresa Horde Owens. But I do want to add, one of the things that attracted me to Salem, Reverend Owens, where I met your husband, was there were so many things for young people to do. It was not like going to a church to just listen. And Reverend Meeks, he was one of us.
Right.
Gates is one of us.
That's
I
right.
mean, we could sing, dance, wear what we wanted to. He adjusted the program to be part of us. He wanted our spiritual lives, but he wanted the entirety of our existence into that worship service. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, a response from Brother Ernest Krim, and then we will get to staying at the table with Teresa Horde Owens. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. when we come forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, Moving Mountain Mondays with Reverend Teresa Hord Owens. Reverend Teresa Hord Owens is one of our regular contributors on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Ernest Krim. Ernest Krim is our guest from the first hour who's hanging with us for just a few minutes in this segment of the show. Ernest, President Teresa Hord Owens raised the question, or maybe it's the concern, that our generation, and again, I'm 60, that we don't listen. And I thought that that was deeply insightful because your generation obviously has so much to contribute. You've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot, we've covered you a lot, but that doesn't mean we have listened enough. Share with us your response to President Owens' thoughts about listening.
Yeah, I agree. I can tell just from that she offers a welcoming space wherever she is, especially in the church. I think that's often been a gripe. I think that when we look at the dwindling percentage of millennials or the youth in general that go to church, I think that we have to look at the church as a microcosm of society. And when I was growing up as a hip hop fan, I would always hear the older generation of hip hop fans ridicule my generation. They would say that ain't real hip hop, this ain't that, and to the point where people would be resentful, didn't feel welcome, to the point where we saw some folks going head to head. I remember like Soulja Boy and Ice-T was going at it, right? As opposed to realizing that as children to our elders, we are learning explicitly from what they teach us and implicitly from what they teach us. So a lot of that has to do with how we felt welcome or unwelcome when we came into those spaces. How am I judged? How am I looked at? Am I embraced with open arms? I think that if we want folks to come back into the church, one of the things for me, as someone who was born and raised in the church, is, and my mother's a minister, it's the fact that, do I have to be perfect to be welcome? And I think that that's often the perception. The feeling is that I have to fully understand everything and accept everything to be there, or can I be there and learn and grow? The churches I feel like that do the best will be the ones that are honest and transparent and say that we are on this journey together. You don't come here like, after you graduate with your degree. You come here as a student in first grade and we learn together. As an educator by trade, I think that we like to challenge things in the millennial generation. We question things. The church space historically has not really been open-minded to that. And of course, we know that's not every church space, but if I have questions, can I ask them without being ridiculed? Is there space for me after the sermon or Bible study? And even the idea of the sermon, I'm being preached at, which is the same feeling I get from my parents. They ridiculing me, condemning me. That's the same feeling I get when I'm at school. They ridiculing me, they condemning me. So where can I go where somebody understands me? And if I'm not feeling that warmth of God, of Jesus Christ from the pastor too, then I'm out of here. And I'm, instead of going to church on Sunday, I'm gonna go to brunch on Sunday instead. So can we go there? And I think, to your point, Reverend, I don't think that we're taught about the radical revolutionary nature of Jesus Christ enough. I think that we often hear about everything else, the aspects that can lead to judgment, as opposed to the aspects that can lead to change. If I'm taught about what Jesus did, what Jesus said, how he served people, how he welcomed people, how he was in the streets with people, then I begin to see myself more. We don't hear about that part. Jesus was out there in them streets. Jesus wasn't in the building. He was healing people.
That's right.
Ernest, let me just say, Ernest, I can't wait for us to continue a large part of this conversation next week. Ernest Krim, thank you for joining us on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on Moving Mountain Monday.
Thank you so much, Ernest. I hope to make it to one of your events in person soon, my friend. And I'd love for you to meet my dad. He would just be so excited to know that there are what he would call committed young people who are doing the right thing. So God bless you, my friend. God bless you.
God bless you. And tell him I said thank you for what he's done.
I will definitely do that.
Thank you, Ernest. Madam President, last week we began a conversation about Staying at the Table, your new book that is forthcoming. And we just heard from a millennial. if you will, in a profound way, someone who's trying to get to the table.
Yeah,
I've been
yeah.
reading the book. I've also studied your relationship and the ministry that you've been engaged with Dr. William Barber, and the direct engagement that your ministry and that your denomination has been bringing to the, if you will, to the social edifice and the construct of the system itself that is without values and without morals. And yet we have this energetic generation of people, largely that Ernest represents, who too, if I'm stating this correctly, are trying to get to the table. Is it an inclusive table, and how do we get them there?
You know, we one of the things that I say in the book, and we talked a little bit last week about why I even wrote the book. I wanted to sort of leave a theological grounding for the things that I've been trying to do over the past 8 years and hope to do over the remaining 6 years of my term. But we use words a lot, right? Our identity statement as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ is we are disciples of Christ, a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. As part of the one body of Christ, we welcome all to the Lord's table as God has welcomed us. Well, if we say those things, we truly, we all say all means all, but we have had the audacity to frame our identity. That's our identity statement, saying, who we are. And yet we still live in a world, in a nation, in a predominantly white church that still has to reckon with its own contribution to structural racism, even though we've named ourselves as a priority to become an anti-racist church. We say that we welcome our Hispanic brothers and sisters. We have Obra Hispana, we have North American, Pacific, and Asian disciples, we have the National Convocation, our African American disciples, but we still, in many ways, simply want people to sort of become subsumed into what we would call it's really a white norm, and we don't want to name it as that. We just want everybody to be like us. And being at the table doesn't mean that you agree with everyone. It really means that you recognize that it's not your table. As Christians, I'm trying to extend this metaphor of the communion table. And disciples, our children learn how to preside at communion at camp. You don't have to be an ordained or licensed person. You have to be an elder or deacon. Our kids can come to the table, say the words of institution, serve other people. We don't ask you questions when you come forward. For me, that's really a metaphor of the covenant that Jesus intended that we have with all of humanity, that we have to welcome all to the table. If you can't stand me sitting next to you, you disagree vehemently. The toughest thing in the world is to recognize the fact that it is not your right to tell me that I don't belong at that table. Because Jesus said I could be there. Jesus wanted everybody to be there. You don't have the right, as John Lewis said, to dehumanize that spark of human divinity that's within each one of us. We don't have the right to tell people that they can't be there. So we have to learn to listen, because only by listening will I learn about your particular perspective. Will I learn the history of your the idioms of your life, right? Not just the language, but the particular history. And by idiom, I mean aspects of our life and our experience that others outside that experience may not fully understand. If I don't listen and try to learn about it, I don't necessarily have to believe everything you say in order to be at the table. What I hope we can do together is learn how we move together to make this world more reflective of the world that Jesus wanted. And that's where all have enough, where all are loved, all are respected. So staying at the table is not easy work. It's hard work. It's not, as we say in our church, unity is not unanimity. It doesn't mean we all agree, but it really, I've started using these words more: common cause, not common belief. I don't care if I agree with everything that the Baptists or the Episcopalians or even Muslims or Hindus believe, but can we all agree that we're here to try to work for the common flourishing of all humanity? If we can believe in that and agree on that, then we can be at the table, and we can allow each other to go our separate ways with whatever doctrinal differences we have. But if we're working for the good of humanity, humanity is going to be a whole lot more interested in what we have to say.
I want to remind our listeners about why this dialogue and this engagement is so very important. Um, we often talk about the story of the Samaritan, but there is a setup before we get to the Samaritan. A lawyer walks up to Jesus of Nazareth and tries to catch him in a theological debate. And that theological debate ends with the question, and who is my neighbor? But the debate on the front side of it was the man wanted to know essentially what the law said. And Jesus asked him, what does the law say? And he said, essentially, to love your neighbor as yourself. And the lawyer then turns to Jesus and he said, well, who is my neighbor? As if to justify the position that he was going to take.
Yeah.
And rather than justifying it, Jesus tells this story of a certain man on a certain road. And in my opinion, he defines that man's behavior as essentially setting the table.
Yeah.
Setting the table.
Mm-hmm.
This becomes the story of the Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Samaritan may be one of the most famous human beings who's ever lived. And yet, we don't know their name.
Mm-hmm.
They are, to that extent, any man, any woman that on this road of life who stumbles upon someone who is less fortunate than themselves, lifts them up, bandages them up, and brings them to the table to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we disagree, even if we're of a different race, even if we're of a different sex and a different class, that somehow that work that you're doing and Dr. Barber are doing around this world house, around this common unity, around this poor people's campaign, are factors in the road to the table. And once we get there, even though we're different, let's stay there. Help me, President Owens.
Absolutely, and at the heart of that is recognizing that that every other person is worthy of being where we are. That Samaritan, there's almost a racial element that, because we call him a good Samaritan. The historical context that is that Samaritans and Jews were hated enemies, right? The quickest way from Galilee to Jerusalem was through Samaria, but the Jews would cross the River Jordan to avoid going through this land. And so it's the religious, the Jewish leaders who pass by the way. It's the person that we have said is not worthy of being at the table with us, who actually is the one who is more faithful to what we say God is telling us to do. And I think that's the powerful piece. We have to believe that the man stopped, and he put him on his beast, right? Reverend Mix had to pick up my husband after having a car accident once, and he joked about coming to get Walter and put him on his beast to get him off the road, but leaving money at the inn, right? So that his needs would be taken care of, to ensure his ongoing flourishing, not just to give him a bandage in the moment, but to ensure that he would be able to move forward from that moment. We yet don't think that people are worthy or that we should be bothered with other people. And unless we see that God has created everyone just as God has created us, we're going to have a problem. We don't believe other people should be at the table. They don't either believe what we say we believe. They don't look like we look. They don't dress the way we want to dress. They like different music. Their politics are not ours. I'm so tired of people telling me that the work of social justice is not the work of the church, when it's the work of the church. It's just a frustrating thing. But even now, as we're preparing for our General Assembly, I'm already hearing from younger people who want us to submit emergency resolutions to oppose the budget bill, to say more than we've said about immigration. We were the first denomination to come out and officially oppose Christian nationalism. And so we're trying to make space for our young people to lead us in naming what the issues are that the church needs to be speaking about. And that's just so important. We have to make space for them.
We're going to need this work to reach out to MAGA.
Yep. Yep.
Going to need this work to reach out to people who have different political positions than our own, who don't feel
right.
the same that we do. And we're going to find out something when we get to the table.
Yep. Yep.
We have a lot more in common than we do apart. I'm Jesse
That's
Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest today is President Teresa Hort Owens. When we come forward. the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. On this Moving Mountain Monday, The Faith Not to Fall with Reverend Terry Hord Owens. She's the president and general minister of the Disciples of Christ in Canada and the United States. Reverend Teresa Hord Owens joins me to dive into the role of the faith community in stepping up to the challenges of being who and what they say they are. That's what we're doing today. We are focusing on how to get there, on the dangerous road in front of Reverend Terry Hord Owens, the dangerous road in front of Reverend William Barber, the dangerous road of every one of us. And I want to pivot just a little bit, since we're trying to get some people to the table. This big bad bill, or big ugly bill, that devastates urban healthcare and rural healthcare, from my perspective, provides an opportunity for us to bring some people wearing red hats to the table. We have something in common. We are all going to lose our Medicaid benefits on the same day. Our mothers who have cardiac problems, our fathers who have cancer, all of these problems, our dialysis programs that are going to be closing, we're all going to have the same problems on the same day when these cuts take effect. It seems to me, Reverend, that in front of your ministry is a very dangerous road, to quote James Baldwin's interpretation of the work that Martin Luther King Jr. had to do. It's a dangerous road to reach out to MAGA. It's a dangerous road to reach out to people of different walks of life who are politically in a different place than we are. They're Republicans. Some of them are to the right of the right. Help me, Reverend. Help us get there.
Well, as you know, I was in South Africa a couple of weeks ago with the World Council of Churches Central Committee. And one of the things that I think certainly people outside the United States forget, and even those of us within the United States forget, is that racism is still an insidious structural presence. And one of the things that's been used to attract MAGA has been what I call a low, slow dog whistle of whiteness, establishing by a white candidate to establish solidarity on that front. I think I heard Ernest say, and we now have an open white supremacist in the White House now. And while we should be able to talk about those things that we have in common in terms of humanity and say, I care about you, and I want you to eat, and I want you to have health care, and I want you to have good schools, and I want you to be able to afford a house, and I want you to be able to support your family without working 3 and 4 jobs. Part of what has happened is that dog whistle of race is so loud in their ears that we're finding it hard to move past it. They almost don't even believe that we care enough about them. And when the myth that there is nowhere for them to go unless they're standing on our backs is still very prevalent and very, very powerful. One of the things that Dr. Barber does so beautifully and powerfully in all of our gatherings, be it Moral Mondays, Poor People's Campaign, Repairs of the Breach, is he will insist on allowing the voices of those who are impacted by these policies to be at the microphone. He's not so concerned. I might be on just for a couple of minutes, but he's not getting, the big guns or the big preachers or the people who already have platform there to speak. He wants to hear from the people who have children who are dependent upon Medicaid to provide from their children who are suffering with life-threatening disease, for people who can't afford their medication. And quite often he will get non-Black people to tell that story because there seems to be this jumping up to a conclusion that, that's just going to impact Black people or people of color. And if we've been elevated to believe that in our whiteness, we're the only Americans, that sense of white Christian nationalism, then we stand in opposition. So it almost has to be them as much as us coming to the table to learn more. We can't act like racism doesn't exist, because that's the dog whistle that's gotten us to this place. And we have to pay attention to these voices and listen to what they're saying. We have to privilege them. We have to, all politics is local, as they say. What's happening in my church in West Virginia, Kentucky, is not what's happening in LA or Chicago. So we have to pay attention to all those things. People culturally approach different things, be it language or racial culture, but even each geography has its own culture. So we got to figure out a way to get beyond this whole dog whistle of racism and whiteness, because it's literally killing us. It's resulting in killing us, because people will turn there thinking that that's where their solidarity lies, instead of people who, like them, are suffering from poverty and low income and not having the resources they need to flourish.
I think what you just said reminded me of a quote, and I had to look it up while you were talking, from Lyndon Johnson. He said, "I'll tell you what's at the bottom of it. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you picking his pocket. Hell, he'll give you, if you give him somebody to look down on, he'll empty his pockets for you."
Yeah.
I didn't say that. Lyndon Johnson said that. And in that moment, I thought about the movie The Free State of Jones.
Mm.
If working class whites could come together beyond race with working class blacks who need to come together with working class whites beyond race, one morning they're going to wake up and find out they're in a majority.
That's right.
They're going to be in a majority.
Yeah.
When they're in a majority, that's what the Senate should look like.
Right.
Congress should look like.
Yeah.
That's what the White House should look like. That's what the court looks like. And then justice will roll down like righteousness, and waters like a mighty stream. Does that make sense to you, Reverend?
Oh, it makes absolute sense. And yes, I have recently reread that quote from Lyndon Johnson. Of course, it was after the programs of the Great Society that, the New Deal was the first shift, right, from those Southern Democrats moving away from the Democratic Party. And Johnson basically kind of sealed the fate of the Southern Democrats moving to the Republican Party. But that is such a powerful truth. The statistics, I think, also tell us, in terms of who voted in 2024, that the MAGA people were really more middle class people, and quite not nearly enough people that we would consider poor or low wealth actually voted. If we could get those people to understand that they have common cause with us and get them to the polls, not nearly enough of them of any race actually voted. And that's something you were talking with Ernest about. Will it take to get people to have faith in this idea, hope in this idea that's led our people from slavery on, this hope of an idea. Sojourner Truth says, "Now, I love this Constitution. It's just got a little weasel in it." So it still has a few weasels in it that we need to get out. But we really do have to figure out how to make common cause. And it will require us to listen to some people that we really don't want to talk to.
One of the things that I've learned from my father, and I've certainly learned from Dr. William Barber, Reverend Al Sharpton, and I've certainly learned from you, is there is no substitute, even with faith, for leadership.
Yeah.
We have to venture into places that we're uncomfortable with.
Yes, yes.
There is no substitute for that. We can all have a public policy speech or have some right course that we believe the government should be taking to address these issues. But unless leadership, unless you, those who can hear my voice, unless we are willing to look at the examples of people who ventured into dangerous territory to build coalition, offer empathy with the situation that we commonly find ourselves in, to reach an understanding. I don't mind being in a room with a bunch of people who are wearing red hats.
Yeah.
If I can just convince them that my father's Parkinson's is the same as their father's Parkinson's, and we need Parkinson's research monies. If I can just convince them that the cancer that they're struggling with is the same cancer that killed my aunt,
That's right.
if I can just convince them that in the final analysis, like John F. Kennedy said, we are all mortal. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, another question for Reverend Terry Hort Owens and some final thoughts, a word of hope from the President and General Minister of the United Disciples of Christ. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr.
You wanna know if I still love you? If I still love you?
Jackson Jr., welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In this final segment, Reverend Teresa Hord Owens, who works with us on the Faith Not to Fall, is our very special guest. Reverend Terry Owens, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you, my brother. It's always good to be here with you.
You know, in this moment, I'm wondering, when you chose the metaphor of the table, and I reflect upon the work in front of the master as a carpenter, to build seats around the table, to construct the table itself, that we are all being called to gather around a table of common brotherhood, a table of common sisterhood. Your reflections on the metaphor of what table we are trying to build here in America, with, of course, the church being the framework of your work, staying at the table, but what you're trying to accomplish in the church. I certainly get the impression this is a reflection of the kind of society, the kind of country, and the kind of world ultimately that you want to build. Help us construct.
Absolutely. And I start with the metaphor of the Lord's Supper, the Lord's table, because it's a powerful one for all Christians. For our denomination in particular, as I mentioned earlier, the disciples kind of came out of a protest against the Scottish Presbyterians in the early 1800s, when the itinerant preacher would come and interview you and decide whether or not you were worthy enough to have communion on that Sunday. And a couple of our founders, Alexander Campbell, a Scottish Presbyterian who had come over with his dad, Thomas Campbell from the UK, from Scotland, and Barton Stone, who was a preacher who was part of the infamous Cane Ridge Revival, 1809, down in Kentucky. Fire and brimstone. Barton was about experience, and Campbell was about reasoning, right? So I always say our church, we love Alexander. We need a little bit more Barton. But we are familiar as disciples, and while this book is written with an eye to the disciples, I hope it speaks more broadly, as you say, to this idea that Walter Brueggemann talks about, the prophet needing to imagine and paint a picture of the kind of society that's possible because of Jesus. The Old Testament prophets, particularly in Isaiah, who would talk about what the Messiah would be like, what he would look like, and even more importantly, what the world would be like. Well, Jesus has come, right? Those of us who believe in Jesus come, Jesus has been resurrected. And so our job is to build that world that is possible because of the teachings of Jesus. I spent more than 25 years in corporate America before even going into ministry. So that notion of people coming to the table had some purchase for me too, just in that sense of dialogue and negotiation and all that sort of stuff. But we have to extend it beyond just the communion table in order for it to mean something to the world, that you can't just welcome me to come into your church and have communion. You got to welcome me to be a part of your community. You have to welcome me to be a part of everything that's going on in our society, or I'm not welcome, or you're not actually who you say you are. We can't just say, you can come in our church, but you don't want me to have the benefits that our society affords to all its persons. There are certain due process rights that are afforded to persons who are simply in our country, not just to citizens, but all persons. And I think Christians and all people of faith would make an argument that we don't care what citizenry you hold, what citizenship status you hold in this or any other country. You are a person, a human being created by God. And as such, I have a responsibility. If I say I follow Jesus, to make sure you're good. I'm called to love God, and as a response to that love, the love that God has for me, I'm responsible for taking care of you and for trying to make sure that you can flourish and that you have the very things that I want for myself. So it is a broader metaphor, and in our denomination, we are a purple church. We've got lots of red churches. We've got lots of blue churches. We've got lots of churches where you could roll a bowling ball down the middle of the divide. We are perhaps as dense as anywhere in the center of the country. Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Texas, Oklahoma, the Carolinas. We're in Southern California, Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, not so much in Chicago proper, although we have a lot of downstate Illinois. So I know you've been having conversations with people downstate, right? That people need to understand that we Chicagoans aren't the only people in Illinois. There are issues that are relevant to people downstate. So I see that even in my church. Most of the people in my church in Illinois are downstate. They're not in Chicago. We don't have a lot of people in Boston or New York, a lot of people in upstate New York. So we have to pay attention to where people are and try to ensure people that all of these voices matter, that all of these voices are important. And one of the reasons that we don't listen to one another is because we've been taught either to be afraid of one another or that we're not just as good. That low, slow dog whistle of racism still permeates Christianity in the United States.
That's what I experienced on the 4th of July. And I say that because my observation on television, on social media, is that this 4th of July, at least for my life, was different than most.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been different than any other 4th of July that I've ever lived. One, he signed a bill that created and will create some of the greatest disparities in the history of the free world.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. The pain and the suffering is going to be extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a shared pain and suffering. Once I remove my Democratic label and you remove your Republican label, we're going to find ourselves in the exact same condition. And the question is, can we move past the dog whistles that you speak of to see the commonness in who we are as people? And I don't know anyone, Reverend Ford Owens, who has done more of that work than you have. You lead a mainline denomination that is predominantly white, and keeping people at the table as an African-American woman, being the first African-American woman, but the second woman to lead the denomination, has been nothing short of miraculous work. We have about 2.5 minutes before the end of our program. Can you share with us a word of hope and how you've been able to keep it together, and the dangerous road that's in front of all of us, we're going to try to keep together as well?
Yeah, and hope is so important. Dangerous road. I'm going to carry those words. I'm a Baldwin fan, as you are. That's an important concept, and it is a dangerous road. I think when, in my own instance, when the church elected me, it was almost, some people compared it to an Obama moment, right? 9 years after, 2008. This was 2017, and people were emotional. When I meet people, they will say, "Oh, I was there when we elected you. I'm so proud of my church. I'm so proud of my church." And what I have to constantly remind people is that you have elected a Black woman. You have elected, you cannot say that you have made any kind of progress if you don't allow me to be who I am. If you insist that I must simply be a colorized version of a white norm, then you have not really seen me or elected me. My phenotype, I'm a light-skinned Black woman, but you have to allow me to be who I am. Only then, when you understand the realities of who I am, the realities of the history from whom I come, the realities of what my people face, that my young, almost 35-year-old son is probably one of the safest drivers in the city of Chicago because he has to be, because he can't afford to even get a random traffic stop for fear of his very life. That these are the realities that I deal with as a Black woman. You have to be willing to let that Black woman lead you if, in fact, we're all going to be able to be at the table. And I got to hear your Spanish soul speaking to me. I got to hear your Asian soul speaking to me, just as I want you to hear my Black soul speaking to you. And we've got to pay attention to who each other actually are. And I think that's at the heart of it. My hope is always Philippians 1:6. I have confidence in this, that the one who began a good work in you will complete it by the day of Jesus Christ. That's where my confidence lies. And I think that's where our hope has to lie.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You've been listening to Dr. Reverend Teresa Hord Owens on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Until tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you, and until we come forward, I'm Jesse Jackson Jr.